Luigi Mangione, the man some see as a villain, others see as a hero, he's back in New York right now, the same bustling city where police say Mangione laid in wait for the CEO of United Healthcare to walk by before shooting him in the back and killing him. Now, not only does he face criminal charges in both Pennsylvania and New York State, he faces federal charges too. And the newly unsealed federal complaint is giving us a look at a potential motive behind the seemingly targeted attack. Welcome to Sidebar, presented by Law&Crime. I'm Jesse Weber. Hey guys, so this is pretty scary. Did you know that children are being diagnosed with serious conditions like type 2 diabetes and non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, and the research is potentially linking ultra-processed foods to this? Yeah, well, Morgan & Morgan is stepping in to fight to hold these food companies accountable. With decades of experience fighting large corporations, they are ready to stand up for the families who deserve justice. So if your child is under 21 and has been diagnosed with type 2 diabetes or fatty liver disease, visit www.forthepeople.com/food to learn more. All right, big day. 26-year-old Luigi Mangione, the suspected killer of United Healthcare CEO Brian Thompson, officially back in New York City after he waived extradition this morning at the courthouse in Blair County, Pennsylvania. Pennsylvania is where, of course, he was apprehended days after the shooting of Thompson outside of the Hilton Hotel in Midtown Manhattan. And remember, Mangione was arrested in McDonald's in Altoona, Pennsylvania. And when he was arrested, law enforcement apparently found this 3D gun, this 9mm pistol, silencer, suppressor in his possession as well, which authorities say all of this was consistent with the weapon that was used to kill Brian Thompson. And also found on him is what's believed to be the fake ID that he allegedly used to check into a New York hostel in the days before the murder. So what happened? Mangione arrived handcuffed in a bright orange jail jumpsuit. According to a New York Times reporter in the room, Mangione gave short answers to the judge when asked if he understood what he was agreeing to. The report from the Times also noted that Mangione was very expressive at the defense table, nodding, shrugging, raising, lowering his eyebrows. And in Pennsylvania, Mangione is charged with possession of an unlicensed firearm, forgery, and providing false identification to police. But he really faces the more serious charges in New York. So state charges, he faces 11 in total. He's charged with 3 counts of murder, including first-degree murder committed in furtherance of terrorism. That could mean life in prison if he's convicted. He's also facing second-degree murder, 2 second-degree murder charges. One of them also is in relation to terrorism. But here's the thing. When Mangione was brought back to New York, he didn't appear in state court to face state charges. No. He appeared in federal court. Why? Because he is now facing federal charges as well. The complaint charges him, this federal complaint that was unsealed, charges him with 4 crimes: stalking, travel in interstate commerce; stalking, use of interstate facilities; murder through use of a firearm; and a firearms offense. And by the way, this is a complaint. Obviously, there will need to be a grand jury indictment. We'll talk about that a little bit more. But after the hearing in Pennsylvania, Mangione left the courthouse in the custody of officers. From there, he was put on a chartered plane, flown straight to New York City. He touched down, reporting indicates, in Long Island, was transported via helicopter to New York City. And based on reporting and photos that were released, he was heavily guarded by law enforcement. In fact, according to CNN chief law enforcement and intelligence analyst John Miller, quote, "The security around Mangione today is because of what they've been seeing in terms of the public support for him, and their security worries about somebody not trying to attack him, but to try and free him from law enforcement." That's an interesting perspective, because that could definitely be the case, given this large outpouring of support for Mangione and the killing of Thompson. You know, you've seen this amongst a certain segment of the population, those who have this resentment towards the health insurance industry, United Healthcare and or corporate America. But that didn't stop New York City Mayor Eric Adams from being one of the people who actually escorted Mangione after he landed in that helicopter. In remarks today, Mayor Adams said the act of terrorism and the violence that stems from Mangione's case is something that will not be tolerated in the city. We wanted to personally be here to show the symbolism of leading from the front. He added, a person that uses a gun to solve a concern, if it's on a school campus or on our streets, there are mechanisms in this country for how to organize around those issues of concern. And he also said, you don't use a gun. So this hearing in federal court in the Southern District of New York happened. And what happened? Well, Mangione confirmed to the judge that he understands his rights, that he's seen the federal complaint. His attorneys apparently didn't fight for bail, as prosecutors were asking he be detained pending trial, but the defense said, we reserve our right to argue this at a later date. So to talk more about the details revealed in the federal complaint and a lot more, I want to bring on friend of the show, former prosecutor, current criminal defense attorney, Sarena Townsend. Sarena, thank you so much for coming on SIDEBAR. I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much for having me.
Okay, so Sarena, parts of the complaint confirmed information that we had seen reporting on, and other parts kind of gave us new details. I'll get to that in a minute. But before we even get to all of that, I gotta ask you about these federal charges here, because my understanding is this could bring the death penalty. So I first want to start, and that's with respect to the murder charge. I'll get to that in a second. I first have to ask your opinion about the stalking charges. So we have the first stalking charge that is centered around him allegedly traveling in interstate commerce, namely that he went from Georgia to New York with the intent to kill and placed Thompson under surveillance with the intent to kill him. And then we have count two, stalking with the intent to kill and placing him under surveillance with the intent to kill, and that Mangione allegedly used an electronic communication service and system of interstate commerce and a facility, namely using a cell phone and internet to plan and carry out the stalking, the shooting and killing of Thompson. A lot of words I threw out there, but basically what we're saying is these two federal charges of stalking with the intent to kill. What do you make of those?
Listen, honestly, I think it's a stretch. And, usually I wouldn't say that. Usually the feds, before they bring any kind of complaint or indictment, they have a very strong case normally, especially SDNY. But here's the thing. The stalking charges have an element that must be proven, and that includes that he placed Brian Thompson in reasonable fear of death. I don't know that they're going to be able to prove that element. I think, look, if they prove that Luigi is Luigi and this is the right guy, I think they check almost every box of those elements of the stalking charges. But again, and if you even think of it as a layperson, that's what stalking is, right? It's that fear. You're looking behind your back. There's this guy who won't leave me alone. He's stalking me. He's making me fear my life. I don't know that they're going to be able to make out that element. Even in the video of the shooting that we saw, Brian Thompson does not seem like he's in fear. He seems like he got shot in the back without knowing it was coming.
Just to be clear, you're saying in order for a stalking charge to work, the victim or the alleged victim has to know they're being surveilled?
Essentially, one of the elements in those two stalking charges is that he placed that person in reasonable fear of death. And I don't know that they're really going to be able to prove that Brian Thompson feared his death. And I know it seems like just a technicality, but there is a reason for certain charges to be able to be charged and met. And I just don't know that they're going to get there. I am curious about what they found on the websites and on the internet usage that he had, because I know that they referenced the fact that he was on a cell phone. They apparently had seen him on a cell phone during their, when they found surveillance footage of what they claim is him. But I don't know that they know the content of that phone call. I don't know what they know. They will probably have to seize his electronic the electronics that they're relying on, the cell phone and whatever laptop computers that he was using, to be able to determine what he was doing and make out the interstate commerce part of those elements too. Interesting,
really interesting perspective on that. By the way, one of the interesting things was according to the FBI agent's affidavit that accompanied this complaint, it says that Mangione took a bus to the Port Authority bus station, but it's still unclear from the complaint if police knew where Mangione got on the bus. I mean, they say that he traveled from Georgia here, but that particular route, I always thought the reporting was the bus originated in Atlanta. We just didn't know exactly where he jumped on from, but maybe we'll learn a little bit more about that. I do want to move on to the murder charge, though. So the federal murder charge, your thoughts on this? So let me lay it out here. The federal murder charge, my understanding, says that Mangione, during the alleged stalking, used and carried a firearm to kill Thompson. and ended up killing him. Again, my understanding is the reason they want this is because this carries the death penalty. So talk to me about whether or not this charge holds water in your eyes.
So, truthfully, I don't think any of the charges hold water simply because all four of the charges rely on that stalking being made out. And again, I know it's that technicality, right? But every single one of the charges either are for stalking or rely on the stalking. Even the murder charge says that while committing the act of stalking, the crime of stalking, he did X, Y, and Z. I really do think that they're going to have some trouble with this. That being said, yes, the death penalty technically is on the table with that charge. And if they can prove all of the elements of that charge, technically he could be facing the death penalty, although it is rare that that does happen.
Wouldn't an argument be it doesn't necessarily have to place the victim in reasonable fear of their life, but it could have if he knew what was going on? Or am I reading it too broadly? I mean, I hear what you're saying. I get it.
Yeah.
And maybe it's the stalking that could be the problem here. And look, I know why the feds are doing this, right? It's similar to the murder terrorism charges at the state level. This is what this is saying. We are trying to deter anyone from doing something like this in the future, and that Mangione, they believe he did this, needs to be punished. That this was a unique, egregious murder that deserves the ultimate punishment. But you're suggesting, I mean, again, wouldn't they have known that? That's the only thing. I feel like, are we reading this too literally? Because how would they be able to put forward that charge without, I mean, it seems like just on the reading of the statute, they should have known that. There's got to be something more here.
There could be. Listen, I'm a former prosecutor myself. I've seen prosecutors overcharge. I've seen things get overlooked in the idea of just kind of what you're saying, which is we just really want to get this guy. We think he deserves the worst, right? So, sometimes they just hope that it goes overlooked. Sometimes they use that in order to initiate or try to get a plea deal before a case gets dismissed or a charge gets dismissed. We have seen overcharging in the past. And look, those technicalities, we are reading it very literally, but the bottom line is at the end of the day, when a case goes to trial and a judge reads charges to a jury, they read them very literally, and everything has a definition to it. That being said, we don't know everything, right? We know everything that's in the affidavit, and that is what they're using to try to establish probable cause. But they always say, and they do say in this affidavit too, we're not telling you everything. Is it possible that they have some sort of evidence that could substantiate the stalking that we don't know about yet? Of course, there's always the possibility that they know more than we do.
And by the way, just to be clear, from a procedural point of view, this was a federal criminal complaint. It still needs to go in front of a grand jury for him ultimately to be indicted, right? So a grand jury might look at this and agree with you.
That's true. They might. If they're listening, very specifically to the elements of the crime and they're not presented with the requisite evidence to get them to where they need to be, then sure, they could choose not to indict. Of course, we also have to remember an indictment relies on a burden of proof that's much lower than a trial burden of proof, which is beyond a reasonable doubt.
And the defense doesn't really have an opportunity to put on a defense in front of a grand jury. Okay, I have a question about this. Let's say federal charges move forward. Okay, let's say it doesn't have this, it meets this technical element. So according to CNN, and more specifically ABC, Danielle Filson, who is a spokesperson for the Manhattan District Attorney's Office of Alvin Bragg, this is the state prosecutors, not the federal, a statement was released that said the state case will proceed in parallel with any federal case. What does that mean? Who goes first? Who prosecutes Mangione first?
That's a really difficult thing to do. And I don't know if it's a little bit premature to say that. You don't want to step on anybody's toes. I would expect that the feds would have precedence here, that they would take the opportunity to move this case forward. If they're trying to say it's going to be parallel, that's fine, but there's a lot of coordination that would need to happen here. And I would expect that the feds would not necessarily love for the state to move forward in tandem with them, because they want to be able to control their prosecution. You don't necessarily want certain things to come out too early. You don't want to tip your hat. You don't want to show your cards to the other side. And I think personally, if it were me, I would strategize that a bit differently.
By the way, it's based on reporting that Karen Friedman Agnifilo, who's representing Mangione in New York, there's concerns that I think that she's expressed with what we're seeing, that he was charged both with what some people could agree with you that these federal charges don't fit. Some people I've interviewed have suggested that the state charges, the murder terrorism charges, are overly aggressive. But I think what she was suggesting was it's strange that he's being charged both on a state level and a federal level so quickly in tandem. Are there any double jeopardy concerns?
I would definitely make that argument if I were his defense attorney.
Is it a good argument, though?
I think it's a fair argument. I don't know that it wins the day, but I do think even just forget procedurally, just on a fairness and equity mindset, is it fair for somebody to be facing murder charges 2 times in 2 different kind of jurisdictions? It's New York, but it's federal and New York State for the same act and for the same crime of murder. I think that double jeopardy was created for the exact reason, meaning the idea that you can't be prosecuted twice for the same thing and be punished twice for the same thing was created for kind of this purpose. Just do it right. If he's the right one, prosecute him the right way. I do think you have the risk of turning off a jury or turning off, regular civilians who are watching this if you go overboard.
Well, the clear example would be if he was charged with murder at the state level and he is acquitted of murder at the state level, he can't be charged again with murder at the state level. There have been so many cases that we have covered where one instance, one event can be charged at both the state and federal level, and there are different charges. I mean, look at the Derek Chauvin case, right? That's a guy for killing George Floyd. He was prosecuted both ways, and I mean, I think it would be tough to argue that. I think you can have an overlap, but it's an argument that could be made. I just don't think it's necessarily would be a successful argument, but we'll see. I do have a question, though. I want to go through some of the details of what this complaint says because we learned new information. It's things that we didn't know before. So first, the complaint did confirm that multiple 9mm shell casings that were found on the ground at the crime scene had the words deny, delay, and depose written on them. Okay. And while the federal filing does confirm that Brian Thompson is the CEO of a healthcare company, it doesn't actually identify which, but we know that Brian Thompson had been a rising star within United Healthcare, working his way to the top spot in that company over the last 20 years. And it also lays out a timeline. Okay, so let's talk about this. November 24th, the shooter checks in, arrives in New York City at 10:11 p.m. on a bus that originated from Atlanta, Georgia. The shooter stays in a hostel on the Upper West Side, registered at that hostel under the name Mark Rosario, allegedly provided a fake New Jersey driver's license. According to the complaint, other than this interaction with the desk clerk, the shooter consistently kept his mask on throughout his time in New York, including while inside the hostel. And as we know, a surveillance photo from inside the hostel shows the suspect smiling at the desk clerk. That was one of the key pieces of evidence in identifying and locating Mr. Mangione. Now, it goes on to say that on the morning of December 4th, this is the day of the shooting, this FBI agent within this complaint says that Mangione left the hostel at around 5:35 a.m., rode an e-bike to the Hilton in Midtown Manhattan. Once he got there, law enforcement says surveillance cameras show him walking around for a while, getting a drink and snack at a coffee shop, we know that to be the Starbucks, and then went to sit on a bench. And also, it's confirmed that the shooter was depicted using a cell phone. We haven't got a ton of information about what he might have been looking at or doing on that cell phone. But from there, the complaint matches what NYPD was able to reveal from almost the beginning, that the shooter steps out from between 2 parked cars, ignoring other bystanders, and shoots Thompson in the leg and the back. And documents say that he walked across the street to an alley where it's believed he stashed that e-bike. Police say that's where they found, by the way, the phone, as well as a water bottle, a snack wrapper in the alley as well, which they have reportedly linked back to Mangione through fingerprint analysis. The shooter rides the bike into Central Park, but when he was caught on camera leaving the park, he was no longer wearing that gray backpack that he had on him. And NYPD officers were finally able to find that backpack in the park. That's the one that had the Monopoly money inside. Now, Mangione, again, if assuming he's the shooter, reportedly gets off the e-bike when he exits Central Park, takes a taxi to the George Washington Bridge bus terminal. That's where we get the now infamous photo of Mangione wearing a face mask and hood sitting in the back of the taxi. And that is when authorities knew that he'd likely left the city as soon as possible, because he was seen on surveillance camera going into the bus terminal but not coming out. December 9th, after evading capture for 5 days, the complaint says at approximately 9:14 a.m., a worker at a fast food restaurant in Altoona, Pennsylvania, aka the McDonald's, called the police about a male customer later identified as Luigi Nicholas Mangione, the defendant, who the worker believed resembled photos of the shooter that had been broadcast in the media following the victim's murder. And then the complaint includes a photo of what police said Mangione had on him on the time of his capture, a loaded 9mm pistol and silencer, again consistent with the weapon used to kill Brian Thompson. And in addition to a gun and silencer, there was also found this so-called manifesto. So Mangione was apparently found with a notebook full of handwritten pages. And this complaint now gives us some new details. It reads, the notebook contains several handwritten pages that expressed hostility towards the health insurance industry and wealthy executives in particular. For example, the notebook contained the following statements and entries that appear to correspond to particular dates. In an entry marked as 8/15, August 15th, the notebook described how the details are finally coming together, and I'm glad in a way that I've procrastinated because it allowed me to learn more about, and then it's an acronym for Company One. The notebook entry also stated that the target is insurance because it checks every box. Then you have an entry marked as 10/22. The notebook stated 1.5 months. This investor conference is a true windfall, and most importantly, the message becomes self-evident. Later on in the entry, the notebook describes an intent to whack the CEO of one of the insurance companies at its investor conference. And as described above, October 22nd, 2024, that was approximately 6 weeks before the date of the murder of the victim, which occurred on the date of Company One's investor conference. And then it goes on to say, the Fed's letter recovered from Mangione stated, I wasn't working with anyone. This was fairly trivial. Some elementary social engineering, basic CAD, a lot of patience. Based on my own research, I believe that CAD refers to computer-aided design. The Fed's letter also stated, P.S. You can check serial numbers to verify this is all self-funded, my own ATM withdrawals. So the FBI says that Mangione had several $1,000s in cash on him, by the way, when he was arrested in an envelope associated with a, quote, an FDIC-insured bank. A lot to break down there, Sarena, but these alleged writings of Mangione, the shooter, my gosh, if you're talking about this being premeditated and planned, I mean, I could see how this could be a goldmine for prosecutors.
Yeah, I mean, the evidence that's found on him is quite damning. The problem, I think, with some of the charges is that you can't just rely on the premeditation. And we mentioned this a little bit earlier. Even the state charge of murder in the first degree requires more than just premeditation. They're essentially saying that he had to have committed this act as an act of terrorism, which is, that's a very rare charge to be charged, even as a murder one. Usually when somebody's charged with murder in the first degree in New York, it's because they killed a cop or, they killed a witness at trial, right? But going back to the evidence, it's true. They're going to use that evidence and, things like the fake ID to connect him to the crime, to connect him to maybe a consciousness of guilt, and to try to establish the motive.
I will tell you that out of every charge he faces in terms of what's the most serious, and I hear your criticisms, and I think they're legitimate criticisms, probably second-degree murder, just an intent to kill, that charge, the state charge, is probably the one that fits this the most. And by the way, correct me if I'm wrong, Sarena, that carries 25 years to life in prison?
It does. That's the legitimate charge, assuming that it is Luigi, all of that stuff has to be proven too.
You saw this timeline and surveillance footage.
I have, but as a criminal defense attorney, you also have to make these arguments because the truth of the matter is they did lose him in the park for 13 minutes. You got to link up every single thing, and it is a circumstantial case. That being said, the evidence is pretty damning at times. So there's an uphill battle there. But you're absolutely right. The charge that fits this case is a state charge, murder in the second degree.
And, look, and he will fight the fingerprints. He will fight the
Right.
ballistics. You know, the idea that the gun he had in him matched the shell casings at the scene, that his fingerprints were found on these items found near the crime scene, challenged the legitimacy of that surveillance footage. Is it really him? I get it. I do have a question for you before I let you go. So as we know, he's being reported. It's been reported that Karen Friedman Agnifilo is representing Mangione in New York. But now, since perhaps this has become a federal case, there are outlets that have reported, like the Daily Beast and CNN, that her husband, New York federal criminal defense attorney Mark Agnifilo, the man currently representing Sean Diddy Combs in his federal criminal case in the Southern District of New York, he's jumped on board too. I mean, I thought at first when I heard this that, look, he's married to her, maybe he's just accompanying her to federal court, but he is a federal criminal defense attorney. And if this reporting is true, would it be strange that he would take Mangione on as a client too?
No, it wouldn't be strange at all. I myself am married to a federal criminal defense attorney.
Yeah.
So listen,
our guy.
yeah, exactly. And look, you need a team for this defense. That is for sure the case. And you need a talented team. And I actually don't think it would be smart to go at this completely solo, no matter who you are. This is gripping the nation, as you would say, right? This is the biggest case that we've seen in a very long time. The stakes are the highest they could ever be, with the death penalty now on the table. You can't just have
on the table,
potentially. Correct. Yes. You cannot just have anybody represent you. And this is going to require an all hands on deck, multiple attorney team, in my opinion.
And I'll just leave it with this. After court, Karen Friedman Agnifilo told reporters, "We're going to respectfully decline to make any comment at this time. Mr. Mangione appreciates everyone's support." Sarena Townsend, thanks so much for coming on. Appreciate you taking the time.
Thank you.
And everybody, that's all we have for you right now here on Sidebar. Thank you so much for joining us. As always, please subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Jesse Weber. Speak to you next time. Hey, so before we jump into this further, I have an exciting announcement for you guys. The video version of Sidebar is now available on Spotify. That's right, and we are so thankful for your guys' support of Sidebar. Us getting this show on Spotify video is truly due to how loyal this audience is. So thank you, thank you, thank you. And yes, you can now watch and listen on the go, from Diddy to the United Healthcare murder updates to crazy court moments. It's all on Spotify. So right now you can scan the QR code on screen or click the link in the description to follow Sidebar on Spotify.